Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Facebook Live. I'm Dr. Jay Harness here at Breast Cancer Answers. And today we're going to continue our discussion about food as medicine. And back with us again is Dr. Gordon Saxe, MD, PhD. Gordon is the executive director of the UC San Diego Center for Integrative Nutrition. And our first two parts of our Interview the Expert series has really gone well with Gordon. And Gordon, welcome back again. Your fans love you out there.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And Jay, don't ever forget the PhD, because I did the research for it in your shop at University of Michigan. Don't forget that.
I will never forget that. And the fact that we've reconnected the way we have 30 some years later is, well, it's a blessing for me, and it's really, really neat, Gordon. So in the first two interviews that we did with you, we gave sort of big overviews, which were the messages I'm getting back from people is that they were really helpful. But today, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, we want to sort of drill down now on the attributes of a healthy cancer prevention sort of approach with food. You and I were just talking a couple of minutes ago before we went on air about some basic principles here. I think you said there are 5 of them. So Gordon, I'm going to throw the ball to you, and let's drill down on food and on the preventative side, if you will.
Sure. So we are asked by patients or people who are at risk for or suffering from many conditions, cancer and non-cancer, and among cancers, particularly breast cancer, but also prostate, colon, and many others. We're asked to come up with more specific things than just simply, oh yeah, diet could be a helpful kind of thing, without any further discussion of that. And while there are huge controversies in the field of diet and nutrition, and I hesitate to recommend one diet for everybody, because that's not the case. I do think that there can be principles that guide what we eat, our food selection, how we prepare food, the way in which we eat it, that are really important and adaptable for many different climates, seasons, health conditions, and so forth.
Oh, fantastic. And then it strikes me that what's going to be good when diet-wise when it comes to potentially the prevention of cancer or decreasing risk or whatever we want to call it, would also be good for our brain, good for our heart, good for our other organ systems, right?
Yeah, it's almost as though we all have different kinds of exposures or things that we've received genetically, acquired through exposure in the environment, whatever, that create points of susceptibility. Some of these things could be more biochemical, others more genetic, others more mechanical, but whatever the case is, we all are susceptible to different things. In one person, it might be heart disease. In somebody else, it might be breast cancer. In one person, it might be both. They have the misfortune of both.
Sure.
And yet, I think in most cases, especially when it comes to chronic diseases, these can be likened to sparks. And the gasoline, I think, is very much, at least the controllable aspects of it, are the food we put in our mouth, and also other lifestyle habits and the way in which we relate with ourselves and in the larger social milieu. And so diet in particular, among the things that we can be exposed to or choose to expose ourselves to, can be something that is toxic and gasoline that flares a fire and turns it into that spark into a raging conflagration, or it can be something that dampens it down and reduces it back down to the level of that spark, hopefully to the point that a person could even be asymptomatic. And I do think that when we have these points of susceptibility, diet is not necessarily going to cure them or get rid of them. We may always be at risk, but I think that if we learn how to live in a healthy way, and particularly with the most controllable element of diet, we can have a strong influence over that. And at a minimum, we can give ourselves a sense of empowerment and help to make conditions more manageable. So maybe even if we still need treatment, we don't need as much.
Well, very good. That's a great overview. So let's go into the 5 principles. Gordon, why don't you start off, tick them off, and share with us what these basic principles are.
Okay, so the first one is that I believe is that our diets should be as much as possible whole, meaning 2 things: unprocessed, unrefined, as close to nature as possible. Which does not mean that we have to eat everything raw. I mean, there are natural methods of food preparation that make food more digestible, and but as much as possible, we don't want to have food that's chemicalized, processed. All that stuff tears at our health. The second aspect of whole means all parts, all edible parts of a food. So if you're going to eat a carrot, you don't just reflexively cut off the skin. There are a lot of nutrients there. Instead, you scrub it, you wash it. If there's a bad spot, you cut around it. It also means eating all the edible parts. So if I'm going to have beets, I'll eat the beet bottoms, but if the leaves, if the tops look good, they're not wilted and all, whatever, if they're fresh and vibrant, I'm going to cook those and have those as well. So
now you just brought up the word cooking. Let me just throw this in because I often hear that cooking gets rid of a lot of important things that we want out of carrots and beets and things of that sort. So are you suggesting that not only we should have these and not peel the skin, but we should also do them raw, or is there value in cooking as well?
Jay, I'm going to come to that in one of the subsequent principles. So don't forget that question because that's an important
one. All right, great.
So continuing on with that first principle, we talk about a whole food plant-based diet. So I've talked about the aspect of wholeness, but plant-based means that for most people, the majority, the foundation of our diet should be plant foods. That's basically what most of our human ancestors ate. Now, there may be an occasional person, say an Eskimo, an Inuit, where plant food was not available most of the year. But even there, during that very brief summer season, they would quickly be harvesting lots of plant food. They would also have seaweed in their diet. They would dry things for use in the summer. In the summer, they'd harvest and dry them for use later in the year. But for most of us living in temperate areas in the United States and Western countries, then the kind of diet we want is mostly plant-based. It's naturally high in the kinds of fibers that nourish our gut microbiome. It's high in plant-based nutrients, phytonutrients, and it doesn't mean that we have to be strict vegans. I'm not arguing for that. People can choose that. For ethical or environmental reasons. That's a separate discussion. If a patient comes to me who wants to be a vegan, I'll guide them in the best ways to make that nutritionally balanced. And if somebody chooses that they want to have animal food of animal origin in their diet, I'll talk with them about that. I do think that we want to have less animal food, especially red meat, than a lot of people are consuming. And when we have animal food, we want it to be of a better quality.
So, Gordon, when we talk about plant-based, we just talked about carrots and beets and broccoli, and I mean, why don't we just tick off some good examples of the kind of plant-based items we should be consuming?
Okay, so I think that there are largely speaking, two foundational food groups that we want to make sure that we have in our diet on a daily basis, if possible. And there are a few others that are also important to have on a regular basis. So the two foundational ones, in my view, and there's controversy about one of them that I will share, are whole grains in the intact kernel form and a wide array of different vegetables with a particular emphasis on leafy green vegetables.
Okay.
So those two food groups, to me, should be more than half of our daily diet.
Okay. All right. Very, very good. So that all comes under principle number 1 that we're talking about right now.
Now, let me articulate the 5, and I think that will kind of answer some of these questions.
All right. Very good.
So, principle number 1 is whole food, plant-based.
Okay.
Principle number 2 is we want our food to be, as much as possible, we want it to be seasonal, meaning when it's the winter in Duluth, Minnesota, it's probably not a good idea to have foods that are from Chile or Argentina, where it's the opposite climate, it's the middle of summer, that have to be shipped in on a jet plane with a huge carbon footprint. And it's unbalancing for the winter time to be eating foods that have a refrigerant property that are cooling. So we want how to eat with the seasons. We want to have food that is cooling and moisturizing when it's hot and dry out. And we want to have food that is more warming and drying when it's cold or wet. And we want to learn how to flow with the seasons. And that means that as much as possible, we want food that is locally or regionally grown to have an important place in our diet. If possible, growing a garden in your own backyard or getting to a farmer's market, that's not feasible for everybody, but at least becoming more attuned to the season of year. And if you eat food that is locally grown, unless it's grown in a hothouse, it's going to be adapted to the season.
Okay. Those are the first 2 principles. How about number 3? What's number 3?
Okay, so the third one is that we want our food as much as possible to be organically grown or sustainably grown. Now that doesn't mean, forgive me, that doesn't mean that you have to go to a boutique place that sells things for 3 times the price because it has the USDA official stamp of organic on it. There are a lot of mom and pop farmers who can't afford the whatever it is, $10,000 or more entry fee to be able to get that certification. And somebody could be growing something hydroponically and get that certification because it doesn't have toxic additives. But what's missing is that it's not grown in a rich soil culture. I would rather have a mom and pop growing something in relatively, soil that hasn't had contaminants, for a while, and that is really rich and imparting the nutrients to the plant that I'm going to then ingest. It also makes the food richer and more flavorful in terms of its taste.
Okay, great. These are wonderful principles. What's number 4?
Okay, so number 4, we want our food, and this one is a little hard to articulate because it has multiple meanings. We want our food to be, and we sort of alluded to this before, we want our food to be balanced. There are many attributes of balance. So, for example, people often think of nutritionally balanced. And while we could quibble with the science or the things like the recommended daily allowances of different nutrients, whether those are at the correct levels, we want our food to be balanced nutritionally balanced. We want to have the proper amounts of macronutrients, of non-nutritive factors like fiber and water, and we also we want to have and this is actually, I'm going to allude to this in a second because it's a 5th principle, but I'll get to that. So I'm going to leave that one in suspense. We want our food to be balanced in terms of the different food groups that we consume. So we don't want to have everything as of just nothing but whole grains or nothing but vegetables. We want to have an array. I neglected to mention other important food groups: beans and legumes, fruit, especially fibrous fruit that's in season, seeds and nuts. There are other foods that I think now people have different tolerances, and some people can't tolerate beans or they can't tolerate this or that. And it's important to learn methods of food preparation that make them more digestible for people.
Okay. All right.
Okay. And then fifth principle is that we want to use our intuition when we're preparing food. We want to unleash that. So we want the food to appeal to all of our senses. We want it to, of course, a lot of people just eat with their eyes, but we want the food to have a balance of colors. Some people calling it eat the rainbow. Other people will talk about the importance of having different tastes or textures. I think that each taste, sour, salty, bitter, pungent, and so forth, tends to point to a different class of nutrients, particularly phytonutrients naturally contained in foods. And if we have, not everything is super sugary or super sweet or super salty the way it tends to be in the standard American diet. We want to have a mild amount of a sweet taste, a mild amount of a salty taste, but we want to emphasize a little bitter, a little sour, and so forth, and have a lower level of the natural flavors of food. We could be punctuated with spices or things a little bit, but we don't want to salt things to death or sweeten things to death.
Right.
And then doing that, we're going to optimize our nutritional balance.
Now, you wanted me to remind you about cooking.
Yes. So thank you. So cooking is one of the ways that we can change the nature of food. As I said before, we don't want everything to necessarily be raw, because that's the more. Now, there are those who argue for it, and who will say, well, gee, when you cook, you're going to destroy enzymes that you need to digest food. You're also going, by cooking, to make some foods more assimilable. You're going to liberate certain things like that are contained in the plant wall that need to be broken down by cooking. And so when we talk about balance, one of them is a balance of cooking methods appropriate to one's health condition and appropriate to the season. So I talked before about, if it's cold outside, we want to eat warming foods. If we learn to follow the rhythms of nature, we'll see that like looking at the sap of a tree, that's going to be in the winter time. Where is it going to be? Is it going to be out in the leaves, or is it going to be down in the roots? It's the latter, down in the roots. So all foods are kind of escaping the colder time by going to the more moderate underground. And at that time of year, we definitely want to have more rooty things, more dormant foods in our diets. Okay. And they're coming around with power tools, so I'm going to step aside and close the door.
Listen, don't worry about it, because we're going to wrap up here in just a second.
Okay, it's going to drown us out in a second.
Yeah. Gordon was always worried about people mowing the lawn and doing all sorts of things. Gordon, I think this is a good place for us to stop, and as a lead in to our next part. I'm going to also, when we get off here, talk to you about some links that we can be posting, maybe over to your Center for Integrative Nutrition, to have some follow-up connection with the 5 principles that you've talked about today. I think they're outstanding. Just quickly summarize those 5 principles. 1 was plant-based and from nature. 2 is organic. Go on. 3.
Organic or biodynamic or sustainable. A third one is that we want our food to be local and seasonal as much as possible. We want our food to appeal to all of the senses and to be a pleasure to eat. We want our food to be balanced, nutritionally balanced, energetically, meaning like, the energy of the plant is going down into the roots. In the winter time, we eat more rooty things, cook them more. We eat more dormant foods like seeds and grains as a percentage of our diet, so forth, and more leafy and salady, more food in the summer.
All right. Well, very good. Well, listen, let's end this particular interview. Folks out there, we're going to be doing more with Dr. Gordon Saxe. We're going to continue to drill down on specifics. I'm also going to start posting some links so that many of you who are sending questions in can follow up and go to the Center for Integrative Nutrition and other very practical things. One of the things we want from this, and Gordon, you know this, we want to have people have really practical things. And I think the 5 principles that you've talked about today has been exactly that. So once again, let me thank Dr. Gordon Saxe. Here at Breast Cancer Answers, we're here for you. I'm Dr. Jay Harness, wishing you all the best, and look forward to seeing you the next time we do another session of interviews with our experts.